Hey everyone, I'm Jacob Winograd, host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute. I'm joined by a man who hopefully doesn't need much of an introduction because, man, if I had to introduce you, Scott, I just think you have so many titles now. I don't know if that I could remember them all at the top of my head. You host your own show. You got your new show with Daryl, Provoked. You've written a litany of books, many of which are behind me right now. You're the director of Libertarian Institute and the editorial director of antiwar.com. And I still feel like I missed something there. Could probably think of one more thing there that I in your impressive resume of stuff. How you doing tonight, Scott?
Thanks very much, man. And thanks for setting me up, Jacob. It's the Scott Horton Academy. I'm the director of that too. It's a brand
Yes,
new thing.
that's the new thing. That's what I wanted to have you on to talk about because when
Yeah.
I heard that this was dropping, man, I was so excited and we'll just kind of jump right into it. I actually wanted to I was going to share my screen just for the audience to get a sneak peek at this website if they haven't checked it out yet, because just right away, it just looks fantastic. You can tell Tom helped with some of the
For sure.
uh, with everything. But Scott, this is something. I mean, you've been like doing stuff nonstop, man, between writing Provoked and then I guess you must have jumped straight into this. But what was the idea behind this? Like, what is your obviously you want to get people to sign up to learn about foreign policy, to get more than what you usually can get from just listening to a podcast or reading a book. But like, what was kind of like the original sort of like when you were conceiving this in your head, and like, what did you want to accomplish when you built, had this idea to start this academy?
Mhm. Well, I think it really starts with Tom Woods. And I think he figured that after my last book came out, that what we really should do is replicate sort of what he did with the Liberty Classroom, only with me, my specialities, and my favorite people to be, also lecturers, uh, course hosters there. And so, yeah, and I guess I agreed with him that, sort of like, I don't know if you saw the Bob Murphy tweet where he says it was funny. I did the Lex Friedman show and I did this 10.5 hour interview. And he says, it's cool. It's like if you watch a 1 hour interview on the Tom Woods show or a 3 hour interview on the Tucker Carlson show or a 10 hour interview on the Lex Friedman show, it's the same thing every time, but it's like zooming in on a fractal and you just
Right.
get a longer and more in-depth version with all this, much more nuance to it the longer you go. Well, so this is that same thing, only this is the 30-hour version of it, where it's essentially me explaining everything I know about the Middle East. And the idea is, as Tom said, is to really get the anti-war movement, and that's libertarians and paleo cons and regular cons and populists and everyone on the right, more and more every day, and on the left too, where everybody who's against all this interventionism, let's get everybody studied up, where everybody really knows the case. One of the worst things that ever happened in the anti-war movement was like a beautiful hippie girl in a sundress saying, "Give peace a chance," because even though that's right or whatever, it seems just naive and ignorant. And that, in fact, national security is not going to be up to you, lady. We're going to figure this out without your input, in fact, you know what I mean? And do what needs to be done. So, what's the opposite of that, right? Is having a bunch of war vets like the guys from Bring Our Troops Home, having a bunch of, well, hell, all kinds of anti war veterans that are taking the lead on the right now. People who came home from the wars and absolutely, got literally and figuratively burned and for nothing, and they resent it and don't want to see that happen to their younger brothers or their sons now. And
Yeah.
um, and so there's this huge move, especially on the right, toward non-interventionism. And anytime, as Tom Wood says, anytime one of us goes up against the Hawks, we win. There's just not enough of us, though. We just need to train up an army of more people who can really, take you through this and make the case. Not just say, I don't believe in it, but actually, you don't have to believe in it either, dude. Let me debunk that for you, and handily so. And so I'm a good enough teacher of it. And I know a lot of really great guys. I mean, you mentioned I have a show of my own. I've done 6,000 interviews since the start of the Iraq War in 2003. And I know a lot of really good dudes. And so when I'm inviting, these other people to come and be guest, pseudo professors here at the academy. I have very good taste in experts, and I know who knows from what and who's worth your time. So
Yeah.
that's
Well,
that's what it's all about. Is trying to make it like open access to create like armies of non-interventionist leaders, not just people who hit like and share, but the people who are making their own dang posts and leading their own groups and founding their own organizations and taking this up as their focus, you know?
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I hear the most when I talk about foreign policy and American history in terms of like, especially like World War II and World War One and on, the thing I get the most from my sort of like non-libertarian friends and family is they go, Jacob, yeah, of course, like we kind of understand what you're saying that like we shouldn't trust the government and war is bad. But man, there's just how can you keep up with everything that's going on and know if you're getting the truth? There's just too much. And so that's kind of it's one thing to say, well, go read this book, right? Not everyone is that kind of person, right? Not everyone's that kind of person where they're going to listen to even a 1 hour Tom Woods show podcast, unfortunately. Now, obviously you should try to push them to do all that, to read the books and listen to the podcasts. But the more, I mean, obviously I do my own podcast, I'm writing my own book right now. And yet I think that beyond just that, we just need more of us out there, whether we're in our workplaces, we're for me, like, in our churches, ruining Thanksgiving dinner by bringing up politics and foreign policy. That like when someone says something, even in passing by, we know what we're talking about, and we can be like, "Oh, this is too much for you. Well, I know about this subject, so I'll help you out." And that's just gonna, I think, continue to capture what you already, I think, accurately said, which is this increasing fervor and desire for a non-interventionist foreign policy in
Yeah.
our country, which, I gotta say, I was really excited to see you, by the way, on with the Young Turks and Anna Kasparian. Because
Mhm.
like for
Oh,
me, seeing you and Dave on that show is wild to me because I came from the left. I used to watch the Young Turks and
oh,
like
that's
so I
interesting.
was yeah, I was like an anti-war, progressive, and then they kind of went away when Trump was elected because
Okay.
they just became consumed by Orange Man bad. But it was kind of so cool to see you not only like I think we're having an effect at sort of, you know, reviving the anti-war sentiment on the left, but then also you got to, sneak in some free market
Yeah.
economic lessons into that conversation,
When
which,
you heard her say, she said, "You libertarians, there's just no question. You guys are the best on foreign policy." And, that ain't just me. It's really antiwar.com, especially Dave DeCamp and the Libertarian Institute, Kyle Anzalone, and our whole group. And, overall, our whole side of the movement is really great on war and always has been. But when it comes to Kyle and Dave, and okay, I'll take a little credit myself too, but especially those guys on like the day to day, the very current events that they're covering, like nobody can tell you what's going on better than them. And they're just so good on this stuff. And so if if you're the Young Turks and you need to really know, and I have people who I was on Redacted, the show Redacted yesterday, and she's telling me things she knows, and she's saying, "Oh, I read this on antiwar.com. Oh, I read this on antiwar.com." Because the fact is, she's learned that you can trust these guys. This is not any kind of thing that you're gonna regret later, mistaking, something, with an agenda for something honest. Like, no, this is something honest, all right. There ain't nobody more honest than Dave DeCamp when it comes to this stuff. So people know that they can rely on us, and then that sets a great example. That's really was always kinda half of my intention. I mean, the show was really just about ending the war, trying to save America by ending the empire as best as possible. But then also, yeah, hopefully a good side effect is that people notice that the best anti-war guys are free market guys, libertarian capitalists, and not socialists. Um, and that there's a reason for that too. You know what I mean? And that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
people ought to catch on. You know, um, I think it's so important now that we're making such headway with Tucker Carlson and others on the right. It's a situation where, look, he's had his own experiences this whole time, but it's not like he really just started reading antiwar.com all the time. You know what I mean? That's not what happened there. Um, but it's sort of like, Colonel McGregor says, that time wins more arguments than reason.
Hmm.
So now you could have people who are even true believers in the war on terrorism, the whole war on terrorism long. Now it's more or less over, and they look back at it and they go, "Okay, well, that was pretty stupid. Jeez, what did we do? We we attacked 7 countries and got nothing out of any of it that anyone could quantify in any way." Um, I bitterly joke, but half serious, that the only real benefit to society from the whole thing is advances in prosthetic limb science.
Yeah.
And for that matter, trauma, like immediate, like life-saving trauma care developed on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan, where people now in horrific car wrecks, if you can get them to the hospital in the first couple of minutes there, you can save them. You know what I mean? Like they've really perfected, or and they've even gotten a lot better at getting them alive to the hospital, basically, is the thing too. The immediate trauma care. But what a horrific silver lining to try to pretend to cite for all of that cost when we could have just worked that out with capital investment and practice and test dummies and not real dead people. You know what I mean? For God's sake, the whole thing is a catastrophe. But then, sorry, I'm off on a tangent. Point being, Tucker Carlson and his fans and the rest can now look at antiwar.com and say, well, look, these guys clearly were right all along. That, and
Yeah.
this is, and, you know, for that matter, our archives there and my books, like, this is the foundation for people to stand on from people who, hey, we were good on it all along. Sorry to like admit that or humble brag or whatever, but the point is like, if you're Tucker Carlson or Tucker Carlson's brother or any of these people who really want to be all the way up to speed on everything that you missed while you guys were still like running around with Fox News or whatever, well, antiwar.com, we've been holding it down for you this whole time. And we got the foundation for you guys to stand on right here.
Well,
And in the form of my books and in our archives there, of which we have a unlimited supply for you.
yeah. No, and I'm sure there's a little bit of like it's really not a brag to be like we were right about all these things. It's kind of like there's as much as we know sometimes, like it's not like, well, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. But like it's
Well,
not
and
like
my
you,
point is,
if you woke up and were like, oh man, actually democracy did spread throughout the Middle East, even though we're not necessarily pro democracy. But it's
yeah,
not like you'd be like, the rest of your life, sort of like living with this regret, like, man, I'm so bummed that there's peace in the Middle East now, and I was wrong about that. You
yeah.
know what I mean? It's nothing like that. Just like when that whole thing popped off with the 12-day war, and then
Mhm.
it didn't turn into a disaster, and then all the usual suspects were going like, "Oh, you dumb libertarians and panicins and all these dumb names that came up for us." Like, you're just not happy that Trump uh successfully maneuvered this peace through strength thing, and you really just wanted it to be this horrible, awful war, right? You wanted your worst case scenario. And it's like, no, we didn't. And like just because it didn't turn into the worst case scenario doesn't mean that
Hasn't
it was
yet.
smart, right? That's like, playing Russian roulette and going, "Ooh, I won. See? That wasn't so bad. Let's do it." Right? It's
That whole
like,
thing is stupid, and those people show all the hawks prove again that they don't know the first thing about Iran or Iran's nuclear program or America's policy toward Iran or anything. That's all they have to say about it. Because if they had to complete a sentence, they would have to say something like, "Well, Iran's program has been completely destroyed, and so now this is no longer an issue." Or they'll definitely not try to make a nuke now, only electricity. So this is no longer an issue or something, but they can't talk about that. They don't know the first thing about it. When in fact, what happened was Donald Trump accepted Israel's frame that for Iran to have a nuclear program at all is tantamount to them having a nuclear weapons program, which means that we have to attack them then. Well, in that case, we're only between attacks and the war on Persia will continue until regime change because the Ayatollah is not going to give up their nuclear program, and neither
yeah.
are his successors. And so they haven't solved anything. And by the way, I never said that the Iran war was going to immediately lead to troops on the ground and World War III and anything like that. And I really don't know anybody who said that. I know a lot of people who pretended that we all said that to say that somehow they were smart and that we had gotten carried away on that. Let's see those people acknowledge the actual missile damage to Tel Aviv. Is that what they thought was going to happen? That Iran was going to destroy all those buildings and kill all those people in Israel? No. So they pretend that, oh, yeah, no, that thing was all perfect. It was just like in our daydreams or whatever. Yeah, right. They didn't solve a damn thing with that. They only made things that much worse. And my point with, hey, new people can rely on what's in my book and what I teach at my academy and all of that. It's not just about like, oh, pay me, I get $6 a book. The point is, if you want to know that you're right, you want to have actual background to stand on in order to be part of this thing with us and trying to prevent the next wars and the rest of it, then we have done the work for you. It's ready
Yeah.
for you. And that's the purpose of the academy too, is that, yeah, I've been doing this all along. And so this is, Tom Woods said, Scott Horton slowed down so you can catch up. Here it is.
Right.
That's it. And
Yeah.
then at the end of the thing, you'll know everything I know. And then some with the rest of my guys too. So that's the
So
whole point of the thing.
I got an audience question here, which actually kind of segues to something I do want to talk to you about this
Sure.
and how it relates to the academy. He said, Jacob, this is from Gorilla Feet 7. So Jacob, could you ask Scott if he has a good book or recommendation, I guess, for the subject of who the Sunni and Shiite are over the past 40 years or so, which kind of gets to, I think one of the things I've noticed in the debates and interactions I've been part of and listened to on Middle East stuff is that there's not just needing to sort of know things like the clean break and know things like project for New American Century and being able to kind of track the different administrations and actors in America and Israel over this time. But there's also sometimes this need to at least know a little bit about, obviously, facts on the ground of the Arab population and their different Muslim factions and even like the factions within the factions, right? Because that plays a big role into understanding the not just understanding the history and things like, for example, why the invasion in Iraq only strengthened Iran, something that was predictable. But then there's also to kind of like be able to accurately assess propaganda because and listen, we're on the Libertarian Christian Institute's live stream, so it's not like I am some pro-Muslim, pro-Islam apologist, right? I have criticisms for Islam, just like I have criticisms for Judaism, any other religion that's not my religion. But yet there is this, obviously, the trope, they hate us for our freedom, and just that this like this came out in the Coleman Hughes debate with Dave Smith, where Coleman's like, well, maybe they had some grievances with our foreign policy, but the key ingredient in Islamic terrorism is they're just radical Islamists, right? And that's just their ideology. And even if we weren't giving them these legitimate grievances, they'd hate us anyway. There's obviously historical reasons we know that that's nonsense, right?
Well,
But
look, I mean, it's a perfect way to state it. No, the key ingredient is the military occupation. They can hate you all day. They knock your towers down because you got troops on their holy land, stupid.
yeah,
Coleman, whatever idiot. Yes,
Coleman Hughes, yeah.
Salafi Muslims look at Hollywood libertine culture and disapprove. That's not the cause of the terrorist war against the United States. You can ask Ramzi Youssef, who blew up the World Trade Center in 93 and wrote a letter to all the New York papers. So I did this because you bomb Iraqis from bases in Saudi and you help Israel murder Palestinians and Lebanese. It's the same thing they said all through the 1990s. It's the same thing they said to recruit people to help them to fight us. They didn't say, oh, don't you disapprove of those people for being so different from you? Give me a break, dude. Kind of
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, there's
$7,000 per post from this idiot. Give me a break.
like there
Before
can
that, the
be
question about the Sunnis and the Shiites, I
oh
tried
yeah, let's
to
do that
address
quick.
this in my book as best as I could in terms of the political warfare here. I don't get too much into the discrepancy um, between the factions. I mean, basically, after Muhammad died, there was a faction fight over who gets the power and the authority. And one of his son-in-laws and nephews, I guess, ran off with half of the power. And they had a big battle at Karbala. And then the other guys went their own way. And so ever since then, The Shiites wear the black hats, which claims that it signifies that they are directly descended from the Prophet Muhammad and carry his blood in their veins, and their religious leaders are venerated as, the mullahs and the ayatollahs that lead the Shiite uh, side. And then on the Sunni side, it's much more like Protestants, where there's 100 different kinds of Sunnis and they pick their own ministers and kind of believe what they want, rather than having a taller order of power like on the Shiite side, which is akin to the Catholic Church in that way. I don't mean to say that they're claimed to be priests and all of that stuff, but just that there's more or less one big Shiite church, with some discrepancies there. Whereas the Sunnis are much more like Protestants, who kind of just pick their own ministers and have their own, wide and very different traditions. And there are a lot of different kind of subsects of
Yeah.
Sunni Islam. Now, in the world, the Shiites are a minority of Muslims, I guess about 20%. In the
Yeah,
Middle
that's
East, they're
about
about
right.
50. It's about half and half in the Middle East, and they're dominant in Iran and in all of southeastern Iraq, importantly. And so, as I'm constantly talking about in the history of the region, in the history of America's terror wars, there, another way to phrase it would be the American instigated Sunni Shiite civil war of the early 2000s, or really a proxy war between Riyadh and Tehran, with America as the idiot pawn in the middle, doing Iran's dirty work because the Iranians sent their agent to lie to the Israeli spies and convince them that if America got rid of Saddam Hussein, that would be good for Israel, when it was always meant to be good for Iran, which is exactly what it ended up being. And then, so that meant, as we always talk about, the redirection in before Obama ever came to town. It was W. Bush who said, oops, I'm fighting a whole war for my regional rivals, the Shiites, and their headquarters in Tehran, Iran. So now I have to tilt back toward the Sunnis and their bosses, regionally's dominant bosses, the Saudis in Riyadh. And that meant backing, that's right, suicide bomber, bin Ladenite, head chopper, shock troops in Libya and in Syria. So they felt regret, I guess, that they had empowered the Shiites in Iraq War II and overthrown Saddam Hussein in favor of Iran's best guys. So then, to try to make up for that, they waged this dirty war for the Sunni side, the worst of the Sunni side, the bin Ladenite terrorists, against the Alawites and the Shiites in Syria, because they were allies with Iran and Hezbollah. And that's contrary to the interests of the Israelis. So even though it was at the behest of the Israelis that the Americans empowered the Shiites in Iraq, now it had to be at the behest of the Israelis that we go and correct that mistake by supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria. And that's what led to the rise of the caliphate back 15 through 10 years ago, and then Iraq War III to destroy it again. And then basically, when they blew up the caliphate, they destroyed it in Iraq and in far eastern Syria. They destroyed the ISIS caliphate. But the Al-Qaeda caliphate in Idlib province stayed. And in fact, when the Iranians, the Russians, and Hezbollah and the Syrian government won the war against the jihadists, they all were forced to get on buses, the survivors, and go to the Idlib province. And there they were kept in safety from 2017 through right at this time, 1 year ago, when they broke out of the Idlib province. So all through the end of Obama, all through Trump won, and all through Biden until the last bit of lame duck Biden. At the end of last November, beginning of December, they broke out of the Idlib province and sacked Damascus and finally destroyed the Ba'athist regime there. Again, because that's what Israel wanted, and so did the Turks, and ultimately, therefore, the Americans. So in this, if you're keeping track, then in this era, America scored a massive, what they call in soccer, an own goal against their own side for the Iranian Shiites. Then they tried to make up for that by backing Al-Qaeda in Syria so badly that blew up into the caliphate. Then they had to back the Shiites again to destroy that caliphate. That was back again, late Obama, early Trump one. And then now they took Al Qaeda's side again, only this time instead of seizing Western Iraq, they went ahead and seized Western Syria and including the capital city. And so you
Yeah,
can
and
see how I might recommend, or I might cite Dr. Paul recommending that, we should not do any of this at
right,
all.
because the
And we should
again,
stop right now.
to my point about Islam, it's like I can, like you said, they would probably still, just like even heck, sometimes even us Christians can just look at American culture today and be like, yeah, it's a bunch of degeneracy at times, right? But even I think the most radical Muslims over there in the Middle East, they might be sitting over there, seething in kind of their hatred of us, but they're not going to strap bombs to their chest and go do a suicide bombing or fly planes in the towers if we're not over there doing all of this. And I mean, you just gave a little snippet of just history since, like,
And
September
that's since
11th.
9/11.
We're not even giving all the antecedents of like
Sure.
everything we've been doing since the 50s, whether it's in Iran or then what we did in Iraq in the 80s and 90s.
Well, here, just real
Yeah,
quick, America supported the Shah to the detriment of the population of Iran so badly that they rose up in a popular revolution and overthrew him. Then
right,
they supported Saddam Hussein, who took power in a bloody coup, and his aggressive war against Iran for 9 years to contain that Shiite revolution. Then Saddam got too big for his britches and got pissed off that the Kuwaitis were calling in their war debts and overproducing from his shared oil wells. So he attacked them and invaded Kuwait. And in fact, James Baker, the Secretary of State, told him, go ahead. And then they betrayed him and turned on him and launched Iraq War One, Desert Storm, the Gulf War, or the first Gulf War, they call it, in 1991. And then in the aftermath of that, they encouraged the Shiite uprising, but then they betrayed it and they let Saddam crush it and kill 100,000 people. Why? Because the Iraqis who had chosen Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq war were now coming across the border to lead the revolution. And they went, oh no. And so they kept their bases in Saudi Arabia in order to bomb and blockade Iraq in the name of protecting those Shiites. Yeah, right. They had already finished putting down the insurrection, but that was the great excuse to stay. And in staying, that was what turned America's bin Ladenite terrorists, who had been America, Britain, and Saudi Arabia's mercenaries fighting against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, fighting against the Serbs in Bosnia and later in Kosovo, and later also fighting against the Russians in Chechnya, turned them against the United States. And as I said, they started bombing us back in 1993. And their first attack on
yeah,
America was in 1990. They actually assassinated a radical right-wing rabbi named Kahane, the leader of the Koch party in New York City. And then in 92, they blew up Americans at a hotel in Aden, Yemen. In 93, they did the first World Trade Center bombing. In 95, they attacked and killed Americans training the National Guard in Saudi Arabia. Of course, 96, the Khobar Towers attack. And I guess we should add Flight 800. Looks like that was a surface to air, shoulder fired missile that took down Flight 800, which is almost certainly bin Ladenites that did that. Then you have, of course, the Bojinka plot. Also, I skipped of 95, where they wanted to kill Bill Clinton and blow up planes over the Pacific. And then you had the Africa embassies of 98, the USS Cole, and then the September 11th attack to kick off this whole era of war. And all of that was stated over and over, time and time again, for the entire lead up to September 11th for 11 years, beginning at the attack in 1990, that this was about American bases in Saudi Arabia being used to bomb and blockade Iraq, and about American support for Israel, killing Palestinians and Lebanese. On top of that, American support for the dictators and kings and sultans and emirs and el presidentes in the region, particularly Abdullah in Saudi, Abdullah in Jordan, and the sock puppet president Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. And they wanted to wage their local revolutions, which they thought we can't do as long as America's here to back these tyrants against us. And so it had everything to do with politics and America's power in their region. You know who admitted that too? Was Dick Cheney on September, though, would have been 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th of 2001, when he went on Meet the Press on Tim Russert's show. And Tim Russert said, "Why do they attack us?" And he said, "Because they want us to withdraw from that part of the world." I mean, nah, what it is they hate democracy, Tim. Democracy. That's what I was supposed to say, right? Okay, good. Thanks. And that was what it was. It had everything to do with politics. And if bin Laden had railed against our culture and had said, "How dare these Christians not accept our prophet Muhammad," or whatever, he would have recruited exactly no one to attack this country. And so, I mean, who knows if that guy Coleman Hughes is really that ignorant, but it's a fun way to frame it. No, the key ingredient in it all is Islam. We're like, no, I mean, clearly the key ingredient is going to be the foreign occupation of the land. You know what I mean? Like, just because the Okinawans don't suicide bomb us doesn't mean that the real problem with the bin Ladenites is that they have fundamentalist religious beliefs rather than we have military bases on their self-proclaimed holy
Well, and it's
soil.
just I don't care what religion you have, it's just the key ingredient towards radicalizing anyone into violence is you like, if you're living in relative prosperity, right? Or even just, like, not the worst possible outcome, like, even if it's just, like 'cause, like, if you're living in more of a, sort of like agrarian, sort of like gather sort of society, because maybe the Arab world is a little bit behind in some places, even then, like, if they're just kinda content living their lives peacefully, like, they're not really like, they might see us on the news or something or in their
Yeah.
papers or talk, but, like, they're not really, like, every day thinking about America, but, like, you lost your son to an American bomb getting dropped on your house, or you lost your parents, or you lost your cousin, you lost your I mean, that then suddenly, that's a whole different ball game. So it's politics and it's just human psychology
Yeah.
at the
And
end of the
also,
day.
look, man, everybody knows this, and it goes without saying, and so it goes unsaid. It sounds conspiratorial, but it's completely true, and Hillary Clinton will give you a whole lecture about it under oath in front of Congress. You could watch it on YouTube. Everybody knows these terrorists belonged to the United States of America, Great Britain, and Saudi Arabia. Bin Laden is the head of what was called the Azam Group. I mean, this is Saudi intelligence's mercenaries. And their chores mostly are killing people that America, Washington, D.C. wants killed, like Serbs and Russians. And then, oh, but guess what? They also have a mind of their own. And they also go ahead and do things against our interests if that's what suits them. And in fact, again, you look at the 1990s where they were attacking us all through the 1990s. And Bill Clinton kept backing them anyway.
Yeah. Well, we kept packing them after 9/11.
And yeah, switch
I
right
mean,
back to them. Yep.
well, I mean, that's, right there behind me, and provoked just goes into all the ways, even like when, after 9/11 and then Putin comes out and he's like, "Hey guys, we're all against, bin Laden nights now, right? We're gonna
Yep.
unite together to take on Islamic terrorists, right?" Right? It's
Nope.
like, nope.
Not if backing suicide bombers means we prevent Russia from building a pipeline through Dagestan for another few years.
Oh, it's just crazy, and it's just I mean, and this is the kind of thing where I actually have had a lot of positive conversations with just people in my non-libertarian sphere. It's just to be like, you know, you can because sometimes it's not even about like we're not gonna push someone into being a libertarian or non-interventionist overnight, but just to get them to at least stop kind of trusting the authorities, stop kind of buying the official narrative and just be like, listen, like, and I've said this to you so many times, Scott, and on this my show to my audience so many times. Like, for all the talk about like, oh, you libertarians don't have like a like you're just pacifists or something. You don't believe in just war. And I'm like, no, no, no. Especially as a Christian, I believe in just war. That's a whole Christian theology and tradition is just war theory. And the whole idea is that war is supposed to be the last thing you do. It's supposed to be, as the Bible says, that you live with peace with all as far as it depends on you, that you have to be exhausting. Even if like you think there's a cause to go to war, you need to be like, well, hold on, before we actually launch this thing, we better stop and make sure there's no off ramp, right? Let's stop and do one final negotiations. Scott, it's not even like we have like some maybe like libertarians from the more, I guess, like Cato reason side of the aisle, who just want to say government is like a bunch of well-intended people who are just not very good at their jobs and very inefficient. It's like that's not even the case here. It's just that they're willfully. It's not that they're like, man, I wish we could find peace. We just suck. They're not even trying to get peace. I mean, I don't think was there any communication between Biden and Putin for his entire administration?
Yes,
I
but
mean,
not
after the
after the
war
war
started?
started.
Right, after
Yeah,
the war started, yeah.
yeah, no, there was no legitimate push by the Americans to solve the problem. They thought there's gonna be a war? Good. Putin
Right.
thinks he's so tough, we're gonna show him, and we're gonna, um, as I was saying earlier there, it's in the book, I know you read it. There's, one press conference where Putin says, "I think they're trying to trap me into doing this. I think they're trying to force me to do this." He could see the chessboard, and then he went for it anyway. In fact, I think he said in that same statement, "I may have to." They're setting the table in a way where I may have no choice but to go ahead and move, which I don't agree with that. I think he did still have other options short of invading to the degree he did and when he did. I do put a huge amount of the
You do.
responsibility on the American side, for provoking it, but I still think that he was wrong to do what he did there, but, um
You have a whole section in your book going on to different alternatives that Putin had
yeah,
other than invasion. At the same time, though, it's like, well, we've invaded countries for way less than what was
it's
going on
true.
there, so 2 things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, and look, you're right. Your point is the Americans didn't want peace. They'd rather have a war. You
Yeah.
know, I joke in the book, in Enough Already at the start of the Libya chapter, I never could remember for sure who it was who said this to me. Um, I think I know who it was, but I didn't wanna, like, call him out or nothing anyway, so I just call the quote apocryphal. But the quote is, "We had a war in Libya?" And then because, yeah, like, you coulda just lived through the years 2010 through 12 and not known that we had a war in 2011. Like, yeah, we had a war in
Yeah.
2011. Remember the wacky Colonel Gaddafi with the mayor sash, like Mayor Quimby on The Simpsons, and like the mirror sunglasses? He was an extra in The Naked Gun 2.5. He was the wacky colonel. He was like Colonel Sanders, man. He's a cultural icon. Wacky Colonel Gaddafi. You know the guy. He had a whole war. Ronald Reagan bombed him for 4 days. It was a big deal. Barack Obama bombed him to death for 9 months. And you got Americans who like don't even know about it. Don't even know that it happened at all. And including educated folk who live in the city. You know what I mean? Like people who they should have heard like somewhere. You know what I mean? Even like a little bit of like overheard a conversation between somebody, but nope. And so, with Iraq War II, they had to lie to your mama for a year and a half. Oh, Saddam Hussein, he's gonna nuke you, lady, with the mustard gas and all of this stuff, to try to get that war ginned up. By the time of Libya, they're like, look, we're going to pretend that Gaddafi's going to murder every last man, woman, and child in Benghazi as soon as he has the opportunity. So we got to launch a war to stop it. And John McCain and the leaders of the Republicans in the Congress were like, all right. And so they just did it. And the American people hardly noticed at all. Barack Obama announced the war from a press conference in Brazil. Let me be clear. We're going to bomb Libya because we're going to protect the people and the name of the thing. They completely ruined their relationship with Putin's temporary replacement, Dmitry Medvedev, there by fooling him into supporting the resolution, saying it was just for a no-fly zone, and then turning it into a 9-month regime change war and his disgrace, and Putin's early return to power as one of the results of that, which he may have come back after one term, but maybe not. And we know it was part of why he came back was obviously if it ain't me, it's not good enough, kind of reasoning after Libya's disgrace there. Um, and then, when Obama turned on the Houthis in 2015 and took Saudi Arabia and Al Qaeda's side, in the war in Yemen. The only announcement was a State Department spokeswoman named Bernadette Meehan just put out a press release. It says America's now going to join and help Saudi Arabia and UAE to fight a war against the Houthis and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, the whole thing's just kind of on autopilot. I think, I wrote in my book about time to get out of Afghanistan. I am not saying pivot to Ukraine and Russia, and I am not saying pivot to Taiwan and China. I'm saying come home, enough of this stuff, but don't you misquote me or get me wrong, because I could see it coming. That book came out
Yeah.
in 17. I wrote it in 16 and 17. Um,
Well,
I
that
could,
seems to
and
unfortunately still be the problem. I mean, as much as Trump promised to end a bunch of stuff day one and he hasn't. And yeah, even when I sometimes still hear him, or really it's more like Advance and other people talking about this, they sometimes still seem like, yeah, they do kind of want to get out of this stuff with Russia and Ukraine, and they would like to figure out a way to maybe end this stuff in Israel and Gaza. But it's always like, well, that's because really, it's always China, right? I mean, it's just
yeah, they
always
want to. That's right.
it's always China. I guess, Venezuela is just a bonus war
Yeah,
for this administration or something. But
yeah. I
uh
don't know what they're gonna do there.
but what do you think? Like, I remember at the end, so like in the lead up to the election, there was like this huge rally in DC near where I live. I'm in southern Pennsylvania, so I went down to it with the LCI guys. It was called Rescue the Republic. And it had this idea, which I, kind of, and listen, I'm an ANCAP libertarian. So for me, saying, rescue the Republic, I have like mixed feelings about that on like a, technical level. But everyone there,
Compared to what, man?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, compared to what? Yeah, compared to this, then obviously.
yeah,
But everyone there's talking a good game about how, like, we shouldn't be sending all this money to all these countries that while our people are suffering, and we shouldn't have this giant bloated bureaucracy and all this stuff, and we should just get back to being a limited constitutional republic. It's like the whole idea. Like every speaker that was there was talking about that, and some obviously, you know, uh, less, there's a spectrum of people there who are like maybe actually like small government conservatives to people who are kind of like, used to be Democrats and progressives. And so they're kind of like somewhere in the middle there. Uh, but now with this administration in there, on one hand, I guess I've seen like this split in the MAGA MAHA movement where
mhm.
half of them have just kind of continued to kind of be like dear leader towards Trump, like he can do no wrong and just trust the plan. But man, there's been a lot of people who've been completely disenfranchised now too, who were just like, this is not what we voted for. This is not what we wanted to happen. And, I just really hope, uh, whether it's through, I guess it's going to be a collective effort. I hope uh, what you're doing. I hope that what other organizations are doing, I hope what we're doing. Maybe the Libertarian Party can still play a role there, but they're still getting stuff sorted out. Uh, but I really hope we can capture on some of this energy to, because people, put it this way, there are some people I know and talk to who they go, listen, Jacob, I don't care about foreign policy. Like maybe it's important to you, but I don't care about it. I just want my government to stop oppressing me and stop taxing me to death and stop.
Yeah,
And I keep telling guys,
that's the
dude,
point.
I get it. That's the
Yeah,
whole point. It's
that's
like
the point. Yep.
you don't want the giant totalitarian bureaucratic nightmare at home. You realize that happens because we created one that goes around the world, and
It's a
those aren't
vicious
disconnected
cycle.
things.
That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah, look, you cannot have a limited world empire and imagine a situation. Okay, we're gonna roll back the domestic state 100%, but we're gonna keep the world empire.
right.
In no universe is that possible. Ron Paul had this formula right, and Ron Paul was as anti-government as any of us. And he's running for president. He goes, "Look, what we're gonna do is we're gonna abolish the empire, and we're gonna save all that money. We're gonna first of all, we're gonna put all those men to work in the productive economy. So that's gonna be great. We're gonna save all that money we've been wasting on high velocity explosions when we could have been putting together goods and services for people and all that. And we're gonna use the savings to one, shore up, but then two, phase out all the national transfer programs, welfare state programs, because the thing is completely unsustainable. What's Ron Paul going to do? Demolish the whole thing? No, man, he's going to take it apart brick by brick. That was the plan. Was everybody born from now on can, or everybody aged 15 or 22 or whatever it is, from here on, you can opt out of the federal welfare programs. You don't have to pay into them anymore, but you're not going to get anything out of them. That's a fair deal. Invest wisely. And
Sold.
then, you know what I mean? And then, um, that's how to do it. That's how to have done it. And to, with a massive war against the regulatory state as well. Um, at the same time, there's so much. And like, I don't know, man. I understand how liberal critics of libertarians think like, oh, we just want like big business to get away with murder or whatever. But I don't think people understand the burden of regulations, of unnecessary regulations on people just trying to do business in the world, whether in medicine or in industry or in any other thing. And there are some things where even those businessmen will say, I kind of like some of those regulations. You know what I mean? We're like, you at least see their point, even if you have a Bob Murphy and anarchist solution to their problem or whatever, you at least see their point. But those same people will tell you that so many of the regulations are just such a financial and time burden and whatever. I remember conversations I used to have with doctors in my cab when I was a cab driver back years ago. And they would always say that, like, so much of their revenue and therefore their costs go to administrative fees. That if we had anything just like a free society where they just run a business, there are a couple of doctors, they know how to run a LLC or a partnership and deliver healthcare services to people. They need one or two secretaries to keep the books and the records and whatever, and then be fine. But no, they have to have an army of employees to keep track of all of the claims, all the papers, all of the
Yeah.
filing, all of the everything in quadruplicate for all the different agencies and all the other things. And it all just comes from legislation and virtually all of it superfluous, where its only purpose is really just to force them to employ unemployable people, and it's just nuts the way so much. And if you just, I'm lucky. I really am lucky that I had that job for so long because I just drove on all different sides of town and day and night and all over. And I just met everybody under the sun. I met 50, 75,000 people. I don't know how many people. I met a lot of people in 8 years of driving a cab. I met a lot of businessmen who could tell you that, like, man, it ain't fair the way that they treat a guy just trying to get along in the universe, man. Make his way around here. Sorry, I screwed that one up, but anyway. Um,
No, I think that like I have a personal experience with all that, and now COVID was the final nail in the coffin of this story. But I was part of a small family business. It was a automotive repair shop,
mhm,
and it was taxes and regulations that completely buried it. And you see this all over the place. Any of the small independent shops in almost any industry right now,
yeah,
they're barely hanging on, and they have like 2 to 4 people doing the job of like 8 to 10 people. Because hiring a person when you're a small entrepreneur, small business, you can't just think about what you have to pay them. You gotta think about all the extra costs that come from all the extra regulations for hiring that person, and then the insurance overheads and whatnot, and the way that government regulations raise the cost on that, like they raise the cost on health insurance. And then on top of all that, then you got to the when you had the COVID lockdowns happen. I mean, that was like one of the largest transfers of wealth from the lower middle class to the upper class that this country has ever seen,
that was
because of what they did there. And it just yeah, now you see a bunch of places where either the small independents closed up or they got bought out by the bigger dealerships or corporations in these different industries. And so there's something about like as I said, I had my start with the left. And even though they're not right on economics, there's something in like your average progressive lefty that when he's looking at the economy around us and seeing the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and the small mom and pop shop not being able to make ends meet, and they're closing up, and now everything is, you know, Amazon and super corporate, and it's less personal. And their intuition, I think, is right when they go, there's something not right about this, man. This is not the way that it's supposed to be. Now, they will wrongly think, well, the issue is evil corporation capitalism bad, and we need the government to save us, not understanding that the corporations and the businesses are, yeah, sometimes they're doing uh they're kind of doing underhanded things because the government's enabling to do them, or they're leveraging the government to do that and to pick winners and losers. But I can't fault the left or the left wingers, especially like a lot of the Gen Z and younger millennial crowd who are just kind of like, uh, angry and like railing against the system. Like, listen, I know you don't like him. Well, actually, you said I listened to you and Daryl talk about. I listened to your show Provoked, and I heard you talk about James Lindsay and say that like he would almost be right and useful in your mind in terms of like his stuff on like critical theory and wokeism and things like that. But obviously he's gone hard in support for Israel and then attacked all of us and called us woke right and anti-Semitic for opposing the war in Gaza. But I had him on my show, and I not only challenged him on that stuff, but I pressed to him like, listen, you see a problem with what he calls like grievance-based identity politics, where like people are sort of acting in the world based upon like, woe is me, I've been screwed, and then they take on this like victim-based mentality. And that's not a good way to like live your life and to build a productive life or to have a productive society. And I'm like, you know what? I agree with you, except when the system is actually screwing you, you can't blame people for feeling screwed. Now,
Of course.
yeah, so it's like on one hand, yes, I agree. There's a poison pill in sort of like feeding into that, and we do think I think we do see on the right and the left that there are some people who are feeding into that towards negative outcomes. But we have to do as libertarians, people who care about who understand free markets, is that we need to come in there and not dismiss their grievances, but be like, you know, like here are the real sources of your grievances, right? Like, and like instead of occupying Wall Street, you should be occupying the Federal Reserve and Washington.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say
No, you're
Washington
so right.
D.C. because I'll be
Yeah.
called an insurrectionist, but you know what I mean.
Look, I mean, this has always been a real problem. I mean, in my lifetime, right? I actually sent a slightly dissenting tweet to, I mean, a text message to Tucker Carlson today. They're like, hey, man, like, I'm not even trying to convince you to be a libertarian or come my way on any of these issues, but I'll have you know that neoliberal is not the same thing as libertarian or
Right.
W. Bush is Ron Paul. But we know that W. Bush is not Ron Paul.
Right.
So, it's they might call it libertarianism, but what is it? We all know exactly what it is. We've been living in a Bill Clintonian economic era this whole time, right? Which means that's what he called free markets and democracy. And maybe some guys at Cato told him, yeah, we'll stand by that or whatever. But that was never what actual doctrine libertarians believed in. We are for freer trade in all cases to the nth degree, right? We are for political and economic freedom in all cases to the nth degree. And so sometimes does that amount to like the more lazy and more connected of us to support things like the World Trade Organization? Yeah, but not most of us. Most libertarians are extremely against any kind of international institution, even if it does regulate in favor of freer trade. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Ron Paul, when I first started paying attention to Ron Paul in the 90s, he would say, no, 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 not like that, like this. You know what I mean? Always differentiating between, even like when they repealed Glass-Steagall. Ron Paul said, no, do not repeal Glass-Steagall. Even though this is a horrible law, It's the last one you should repeal when you
Right.
repeal these other 10 first. And the
Yep.
first ones you should repeal are the ones where you're allowed to print money out of nothing. And then the second ones you should repeal are the ones that say, we got to bail your ass out when you fail because you created a bunch of money out of nothing and loaned it out on bad loans. Then we can talk about Glass-Steagall when mixing the customer's deposits with the bank's deposits for speculation purposes is not dangerous because there's no speculation to be had because the government is not printing funny money and they're not allowing all this
Right.
gambling in the first place. Fraud is fraud. You outlaw that first. Then
Right.
Glass-Steagall becomes superfluous. That was Dr. Paul's point. Now, Phil Gramm said, oh, get it? It's deregulation. And in all cases, deregulation is good. And then Bill Clinton signed it. Don't you blame libertarianism for that. That was the neoliberals and the standard baseline economic conservatives like Phil Gramm who supported that. So it's a huge misnomer. It's always been a problem, although this was, like, to me, a fascinating insight as a young guy that, oh, you see what they do every time, including the original example. In the 1920s, it was the government that ruined the economy and caused the crash of 29. And then in the 30s, it was government that made the Depression worse and worse and worse through New Deal regulation and spending and misallocation and regime uncertainty and the rest. And then when they say, oh, the war saved us from the economy, all they mean is the government went deep into debt, but they did build a bunch of factories and stuff that were then turned to domestic uses when the war was over. But what you're talking about is a long train of absolutely devastating economic interventions that then has this entire false mythology around it that says that no, it was freedom and the excesses of laissez-faire free market capitalism in the 20s that caused the crash of 29. And then it was the brilliant New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt that solved that problem. Now, yes, it maybe didn't really end until 1946, but that's only because of what a bad depression the capitalists had caused. Like, come on now. And then the first time you read a real free market guy, and I don't mean Milton Friedman, who says the government didn't print enough money. I mean, read a real free market guy like Murray Rothbard or Dr. Bob Murphy, for example, on the Great Depression. Or I think actually my first exposure to this was probably the John Birchers had this right because they were essentially Mises Rothbard types on money. Not perfect on everything, but perfect on money. And they understood. G. Edward Griffin in The Creature from Jekyll Island gets the story
Yep.
of the Great Depression correct. That. And I think Gary Allen in None Dare Call It Conspiracy probably gets it right as well. And then, boy, if you already know that, and then you see what happened in 2008, where they pretended what? That George W. Bush was Ron Paul, and that we had just lived not through an era of Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke printing money and shoveling it into their favorite sectors of the economy or anything like that. Nope. All we saw was that George W. Paul repealed Glass-Steagall, and that created a laissez-faire free market system, and that caused the crash of 08. So now we need Obama to come in and do a new deal and to do big stimulus spending to save us from the Depression, all this stuff. And it's just, you
Well,
see
and
people taking
we
the wrong lesson from something when you already know just how wrong that is. But anyway, I guess the silver lining of that being that, boy, once you hear it right, then you know that that's really right. And that, boy, what a tragedy then that like all American public schools have taught this wrong the whole time. And everyone only, even when we all know that the New Deal was in the 1930s and that it never was repealed, still somehow the American 2000s were the 1920s again. And it was a laissez-faire free market system. No central bank or anything, even though the central bank was actually signed into
Right.
law and implemented in 1914. But anyway, well,
Yeah.
signed in 13 and implemented in 14.
No, it's absolutely crazy, and that's why we'll wrap up here because I know you gotta
Yeah,
go eat
sorry
and then
about
get ready for your show with Daryl, but, the Scott Horton Academy, I think is just to plug that here at the end, we need things like this because what you just described can just as easily happen again now. Because as
Yep.
much as we know that Donald Trump and this administration aren't libertarian, what is like one of the few things that people are going to point to that Trump's doing? They'll be like, oh, he's repealing regulation, right? And they'll say that some libertarians supported him and things like that. And so then, but if we keep on the money printing scheme and then, while Trump is in office or shortly after he comes into office, we go through another bust, what are they going to blame? Are they going to blame the
They're gonna
spending?
blame the
Are
deregulation
they're
as
gonna blame
always.
the deregulation and all that again. So we gotta get the only answer is that we gotta get out and educate people on,
Yeah.
all this stuff, the
You know what we
connection
gotta
between.
do? And look, and this is the Ron Paulian way. Come at them in a way that's gonna confuse them. Demand total deregulation. The first regulations that have to go in the good times now, right now, before the crash, we must demand that the regulations that must be repealed first, highest priority, are the regulations that say that we have to bail these banks out when they fail.
Absolutely.
That's regulation too. And
Yep.
those things have to go. And every banker needs to know when the next crash comes, you're jumping out the window, pal, because we're not coming for you. And they have to know that. That's real free market deregulation right there. The Federal Reserve might have given you a license to print money, but you better watch your ass how much you exploit that license.
Wait,
Because
Scott,
you
you're
might
saying
find yourself jumping out the window, pal.
you mean it's not deregulation when you give banks cheap money and tell them do whatever you want with it?
Nope. And I'm just saying it's going to be a lot. If we had my way, we'd have my way.
Yeah.
But I say, they won't listen to us when we say they're not allowed to print money no more. So let's start with, can you hear me now? Let's start with no bailouts.
Right.
And how about any
Yep.
congressman who proposes a bailout? We burn down his house. Or wait, how about we like virtually tar and feather him in Minecraft or like something really bad, like burn and tar and feather an effigy of him near his house. We make sure that these guys know that we are very, very unhappy and we will not stand for those bailouts. And honestly, seriously, I mean, if that really was a controversy out in the culture, if that was something that people were talking about all the time, after the next crash, they're going to bail out all the banks again. That's what we all hate so much. If people just talked about that all the time, then in the business and banking community, they would have to know that like these people really might not stand for it next time. And maybe we do need to just cover our bad loans instead of assuming that we can just make the public cover them for us.
Yeah.
And let them be afraid, maybe even beyond what's reasonable.
I mean, I'm a Christian libertarian, so I'm pro peace, but at the same time, part of peace is that politicians and while you have a central bank, probably the bankers should be a little bit afraid. That's a good it's a good way to freedom, right? Like that
That's what
whole
Thomas Jefferson would say. It's
yeah.
okay. It's
It's
okay
okay
to
for the
value.
politicians to be a little bit, like they should be. And that's like, I don't know, there's something we've lost in our culture where, I think especially after January 6th, where people are like, all the poor politicians were afraid of the people. And I'm like, isn't that kind of like the whole point of
They had
America?
the bags
Like
on
what
their head.
happened?
That was great.
Yeah, I know. Scott,
All right.
thanks again for coming on here. Where can people, what is it? Easiest way to find, because you're going to be
Oh,
with
just look me
Daryl
up
here in
on
a minute.
X. I got all my links. Just go to x.com/Scott Horton Show. And I got all you need right there for you.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks again, Scott, for joining us, and we'll talk to you again next time. Take care.